now. So a huge welcome to anyone joining us through the glorious medium of YouTube. We are recording this mid-April, actually. It's probably important that people know, so we will have time travelled by the time this video is made live, sort of. But we are recording it as part of the Saboteur Awards Festival for 2021, which we've kind of put together as more of a community-based festival, I suppose, for want of a better term for it. And we reached out to various artists and organisations who wanted to join us to have a chat about what they were doing, what they had been doing, or rather what they hadn't been doing, perhaps as a result of lockdown and the pandemic. And one of the organisations that was kind enough to reach out to us is Drunk Muse Press, which is who we are joined by today through the glorious medium of Zoom. So rather than do all of the talking, I will hand over to them for them to introduce themselves and introduce a little bit about the press, and then we can all have that awkward Zoom delay where we talk over each other. So to try and sidestep the first opportunity for that to happen, Neil, would you be so kind as to introduce yourself and perhaps introduce a little bit about the press, and then you can throw one of your editors under the bus for them to introduce themselves afterwards.
Sure. Yeah, it's so embarrassing having to kind of write your own kind of preview, isn't it?
Yeah, we should have scripted it really, shouldn't we, before?
I should have a wee sheet to read from. My name's Neil Young. I'm a journalist, and for my living and in my other existence, I'm a poet and a publisher based in Northeast Scotland. And I co-founded Drunk Muse Press at the start of this year with Hugh McMillan, also based in Scotland, a renowned Scottish poet, and Jessamine O'Connor in Roscommon in Ireland, one of my favourite Irish poets. And so it came about really because of the feeling that there was a dearth of independent publishing outlets in Scotland in particular, although we keep on hearing that there's so much poetry and great poetry being written, there's very little outlet for its publication. And in particular, although there are some very good small presses and publishers out there, and I wouldn't want to denigrate that or belittle that, some of them tend to be very voguish or niche, or they're looking for poets of a particular profile. And there was a feeling, especially I think between me and Hugh, that not just good poets, but some of the best poets in Scotland were having to go looking for publications and outlets that should have just been looking for them. So Drunk Muse came about partly as a result of that, and because Hugh and Jessamine and I, we're friends in that kind of way that you pick people up on your poetry travels, don't you? And you end up sleeping on their settees and getting free holidays and drinking their whiskies, and they give you readings in return. And we got on well and we work well, so it seemed the obvious thing to do. So that's my preamble, and I'll hand over to the other two now. Add to that. I'm out of here now.
I'll jump in and talk now then, will I? Neil also founded and edited a magazine called Poets Republic, which is another reason why he and I sort of got together. And Poets Republic magazine made a sort of virtue of publishing from minority areas, sort of thing, of Scotland, as well as people who needed heard, who hadn't been heard, and so on. And their special issues have been fantastic, I think. And I always thought Drunk Muse Press was a kind of a extension of that. Really, it's not just another publishing outlet, but it's looking for to publish people who are well worthy of publication, but simply have been ill served by the outlets there already. And I do think Scottish poetry, I mean, I don't know what it's like elsewhere. Scottish poetry is pretty cliquey. It is based on sort of power centres and so on. And so this idea is that you know, a poetry and a magazine, a press from the northeast of Scotland, arguably a periphery. I'm from the southwest of Scotland, which is another, you know, periphery of Scotland, which, you know, full of brilliant poets, but not recognised as one of the great literary sort of powerhouses, although it should be. So I'm seeing Drunk Muse Press as of shining a light into areas that need illumination like that. Yeah, one of the I know Neil's going to talk about the book that's coming out quite soon with Drunk Muse Press, which is a fantastic sort of memoir by Darine Tatua. One of the books that later come on later on in the year is not as innovative and revolutionary, but a great contribution to Scottish literature as well. A kind of 85-year-old Scots language poet called Josie Neal, who's never had a book published in her life, but is thought of as, you know, one of the great sort of linguistic treasures of Scotland. And we're putting a book of her collected poems out, you know, the first ever. And again, that is another sort of memorable event. So that's the kind of thing that I hope the press, and I see the path that's been outlined. That's the way we're going, I hope. I don't know if Neil wants to, and Jess wants to say about the Darine thing.
Yeah. Well, I'll just Jessamine, I don't know. I think we were talking about maybe having a reading from an extract from the book, but maybe if should I explain a wee bit about it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, Hugh throughout the lockdown has been running a online blog which has brought together poets from right across the world to record a poem. It's become a bit of an international phenomenon, and
nobody's heard of it though, but nonetheless, an international phenomenon that nobody's heard of.
Plague of poems. Well, it hasn't got the publicity and the recognition it deserves, apart from among the poets. And you've had everybody on this blog, from the unknown to laureates in New Zealand and New Mexico and the North Pole or whatever, Iceland. And one of the poets who came onto the blog was Darine Tatua, who a Palestinian dissident poet who was jailed by the Israeli authorities in 2016 after writing a poem and publicizing it on the internet called "Resist My People, Resist Them." And Darine's imprisonment provoked an international outcry. At one point, there was 9 Pulitzer Prize winners wrote letters of protest. International Pen were involved. So she is an extraordinary poet and a woman of extraordinary courage and humanity. And just speculatively, I thought, okay, we just founded this new press. Why don't we just approach her and say, we'd like to publish a volume of your books, because her books are banned and her manuscripts are confiscated in Israel and in the occupied territories. And she said yes, but she also said, oh, by the way, I've got a prison memoir. I didn't even know when I sent her a message on Facebook, whether she was going to be able to communicate back in English, but she could. You know, her English it's okay and getting better all the time. And she said, we've got to publish that. We've got to publish that. And I said, well, I've never published a memoir or a book before, but so we snatched her hand off. And it's curious how these things happen sometimes, because we started to do this and we realized that this book has never been published in English anywhere in the world. And here I am now editing it from a wee office in an outpost of northeast Scotland on what little time that I can manage in between my paid livelihood, walking the dog, looking after my daughter and all this kind of stuff. But sometimes in poetry and in literature, that is the way that things work, and work really well. You know, so Faber and Faber, Penguin, Random House, all of you out there, tough, wait your turn. You know, you should have got in there first. And so the book will be published. I'm sending test copies, getting test copies hopefully from the printer next week, and will be published in Scotland either at the end of this month or beginning of May. And I fully expect that the biggest problem that we are going to have is getting enough copies printed, and I'll have to get the dog to lick the stamps, you know. So and there will be a link available to order the book online. And I really don't want to say any more now, because I think it's probably best that Jessamine maybe reads an extract from the book. Would that be a good idea?
Sure. I'll just read like some small part from it. Hello. So this is from Darlene Tetter's memoir. I'll just read like a page maybe. One morning, while I was with the Nashon unit soldier, waiting for the registration officer in the prison yard to record my departure time, I came to the entrance of the yard, only to see a group of soldiers circling a child, one of the brave young detainees, who I estimated, based on his facial features and overall physical appearance, to be around 12 years of age. He was shackled with a number of chains, 2 handcuffs, 2 leg cuffs, and a chain connecting those hand and leg cuffs through a loop in the middle. His left forearm was wrapped with white bandage, which indicated a recent injury. The boy seemed to be weighed down by the chains. He could barely walk. 4 or 5 steps, pause, take a break, catch a breath, repeat. However, the soldiers forced him to move forward at a quicker pace. They shouted at him, using words translated as, "Come on, boy, move, faster." He drew nearer and nearer to where I was standing. He was only a few steps away from me when he tripped over the chains, lost balance, and fell. He started crying. My body, reactively and involuntarily, moved in his direction so as to help him get up from that terrible fall. The soldier held my cuffs and stopped me. "Let me help him stand up. He needs help. Look at him. He's an injured, shackled child," I told her. "He is a subversive, and he deserves what is happening to him. You have nothing to do with him," she replied. For the first time since my arrest, I felt oppressed. I felt oppressed enough that I actually considered acting on it by beating the recruit up. I almost did, but regained my self-control, suppressed the anger that was burning inside after seeing a child in such a condition. At that moment, I was nothing but a helpless political prisoner. I couldn't achieve that duty of humanity. He was lying on the ground right before my eyes, and I couldn't find a way to offer my help. Words were all I had. Loudly, I encouraged him with some uplifting phrases. Hoped he'd be able to overcome that ordeal. "Stand up, you're stronger than they are. Come on, stand up. You will be just fine." He looked at me. His innocent expressions of teary eyes were smiling at me. Then he expressed his gratitude with a thank you.
Ooh.
Yeah, it's very moving.
What an extract! Honestly, I'm already so invested in this just from that snippet of it. That's so beautiful, but crushing at the same time, which I suspect is likely the book in its entirety. That kind of balance between hideous experiences that have been beautifully communicated. It sounds like a huge and special project to be kickstarting the press with.
Yeah.
I think it's an important book for several reasons. First of all, it shatters the censorship and the violence that has been imposed on Dareen and Palestinian people. And so it's important in that respect. It's also very important in that it's one of the few, if not only, prison memoirs written from the perspective of a woman, and it's very much from a feminist perspective. So there have been lots of memoirs written by men prisoners, but so this is important for other Palestinian women to know that this book is being written and that their experiences are recorded and are described and shared with the outside world. So And then we're after this, we'll be moving on to publishing conventional poetry books.
We're gonna set the bar with a deep and moving memoir, and then move swiftly into poetry. So you already have a poetry publication lined up for after this memoir, I think Hugh was saying.
Well, that's one for later on, the Josie Neal one, but we have poetry collections by two other poets come out, Harry Smart and George Gunn, both very, very prominent poets in the Scottish scene. So when are they coming out, Neil? Should they be out by the summer?
They should be out by the summer. I'm hoping to host a mini poetry festival up here in Stonehaven, where I live. I'll call it a mini poetry festival because if it works really well, I'll call it a festival. And if it doesn't, then it's just an attempt, and hopefully it will be possible then, if we're all crystal ball gazing with COVID, obviously, to have launches of Harry Smart's book and George Gunn's book at the same time, where there'll be living beings in the same room, because I think we all miss that immensely, and we want an audience in front of us, so that'll be July. That should be the end of July.
It sounds like you have a packed year already. I don't know how the three of you have managed to get so much lined up kind of straight out the gate, as it were. You must have worked your conkers off getting all of this sorted.
Look, I always think great credit to Neil. I don't know if Jess would agree with this. Neil does all the work while Jess and I just do boutique stuff. We just do boutique stuff.
Well, so far I've done like nothing, because as I said at the beginning, I'm tied up until May. So I kind of said that at the beginning, but now I'm just watching you guys slogging away for months and getting all this cool stuff going, and I'm just like taking the credit.
I mean, that seems like the best job of all.
It is. No, but there'll be an Irish poet brought out towards the end of the year probably, and then another one in next spring, all going well. I think that's the plan.
Yeah.
And I promise to do something then.
I do think the Josie Neal thing does involve a bit of work. I was saying this at a meeting Neil and Jess and I were at the other day, in that we set off with this grand idea to have Josie Neal's collected poems. I've heard her read them over the years. I can remember their titles, but she's a bit older now, and she's a wee bit wandered, as we say up here. And since there are no poems ever published, and we began to think, well, we're doing this collected poems with Josie Neal, and there are no poems. So it's going to be one of these great books where we're scraping poems up from all over the place. And a really touching thing was, I got in touch with her. Obviously, you're not allowed to see her. I mean, she's 85. Get in touch with her to say, surely you must have some typescripts of poems that you've read in the past and stuff like this. And there's great silences, and then he talks about other stuff, obviously really entertaining, raconteur and blether, but no poems. And then I got through the post this envelope with 7 handwritten poems in it, which she'd recalled from memory. She'd written the 7 of them from memory, so that's all we've got from her. But there are various other things we're pursuing. Otherwise, we'll all have to get together, the three of us, and make them up.
Well, speaking of which, that kind of feeds neatly into my next question, actually. So we know what's happening with the press, or we know what has been happening with the press kind of through the lockdown months. I'll nominate a speaker, as it were. Jessamine, you mentioned just now, and I know that you and I have kind of talked over email as well, that you've been tied up with other things, like ahead of the run up to the press kicking off, as it were. Could you maybe tell us a little bit about your kind of personal projects that you've been pushing along through the pandemic months?
Okay.
You're like, yes, but only in a self-deprecating writer sort of way.
Yeah, well, I mean, my reason for keeping the back foot is that I kind of went to, I'm like a mature student, but I'll be finished. I went to college like a couple of years ago, but I'll be finished in May. So that's been just taking up my whole headspace. But that's been great, actually, really interesting, and a great course in writing and literature in Sligo IT, which is really, it's been fantastic. So I can't complain about it, but then sometimes I can complain about it because but I suppose I've just been footling, doing things, and I haven't really been writing enough. I haven't been writing a lot of poems the last year. I've been focusing on, I'm trying to write like everybody over here anyway, everybody's writing a novel, and I've been writing a novel. So that's kind of taken up my headspace. And then as a result of that, the poems that I've written over the last few months have all kind of just gone weird. They're kind of very long and meandering and just like, what? So, you know, I don't know, it's all strange, but that's fine. You can follow that along. That's really it.
I think the lockdown months and the pandemic months have kind of impacted people in very strange ways, in that it's either spurred on creativity to kind of like a compulsive degree, wherein people have needed it in order to kind of keep themselves going, or it's had the opposite effect entirely, wherein kind of upholding your normal level of creativity or your normal level of writing output has been really quite challenging, understandably so, because everything that we faced in the last 12 months hasn't been the most inspiring, which feels like quite an understatement to make. But yeah, I think there are a lot of writers who kind of find themselves either not writing as much, or things that they are writing are now sort of vastly different to what they might have written in, say, 2019, before kind of all of this was a reality, or all of this was something that was even a flicker on the radar even. So I think it's quite a common affliction.
Like I would normally one of the things that hasn't happened in the last year is my kind of arts collective that I'd be part of, but we'd normally put on poetry and music kind of events regularly, every couple of months anyway, or less, in this area. But that obviously hasn't happened. And, I prefer to do things with other people and then write on my own. But writing just on your own all the time is just a bit tedious. But,
I think we've maybe underestimated kind of how much we feed off our respective writing communities. Even if it is one open mic night a month. I know that I was saying earlier before we hit the big record button, I've got an open mic event that I run monthly in my own city, and I've really just missed kind of that interaction, whether it be hearing people read, or even if it's just kind of having a natter and a cup of tea and a slab of cake with people who are like-minded, or who are working towards the same kind of like common writing goal, or the same common publishing goal, or whatever it may be. I think it's something that we'll all probably feel quite different towards when we get it back again. Which, pray God, any month now, she says optimistically. Hugh, I know that you mentioned that you had started an international blog space, or rather, I think Neil might have mentioned that you'd started an international blog space. Actually, could you maybe tell people a little bit more about that, kind of while we've got you hostage?
Yeah, I'm a bit the opposite of you both, actually. I hate folk, and so this has been really a very good time for me. I was explaining before we came on the air there that the village I live in has been in lockdown for 4 centuries, and basically nothing has changed here. We're as antisocial as ever. We crossed the road and we saw somebody come in before all this. Never mind, during it. So I've found it a tremendously productive time. I gave up my work just before it happened,
right.
And so I've never written so much personally. I mean, I've got several good projects in the pipeline, a couple of books coming out later on in the year. But the great lockdown project, as you were saying, was this Plague of Poets thing, which was a daily blog. I mean, it was, looking back on it, I think it's quite an achievement, really. I put up a poetry video, specially videoed by the poet themselves, every day for between March and the following January.
Oh my God.
So I mean, so that's you know, that was a lot of work, really. and it was very democratic in that, you know, there were teenagers, there were all sorts of people, you know, unknown folk up to the very best of known folk, except for the snotty ones that wouldn't reply. All I did was email folk or Facebook them, or you know, tried to get in touch with them. And there are some great poets in that blog, but there are some great poets who are not known. You know, some great poets who are lesser known to the world. And the blog got a good following. There was a lot of people, you know, followed it from all over the world, and so that was a worthwhile thing. Yes, and it did quite. I'm joking about being antisocial, really. Did give me loads and loads of contacts with people, really lovely, amazing, and friendly people, and of importance, like Darine, for instance. One of the things that I meant to jump in earlier on when Neil was talking about Darine, the other important thing about publishing Darine's prison memoirs is to draw attention to the fact it's still going on. I mean, I looked at Darine's website yesterday, and she was talking about another Palestinian writer, a woman writer who in Ramallah who'd just been imprisoned as well. You know, so this is an ongoing situation. So anyway, as far as lockdown's concerned, Drunk Muse Press is a great project, but you know, I've had several other projects going at the same time, and it's been a very fecund time for me. So yeah, I'm not saying bring on more pandemics, but you know, it's been good.
Like, I wouldn't endorse it as a means for generating creativity, but it hasn't been the worst.
Just waiting for the next one.
Neil, where on the scale do you feel like you fall in terms of kind of personal projects through the pandemic months?
Well, it's hard to follow that from Hugh. I want to go one better, and just I'm dancing around trying to bring on a plague of locusts, because I really like just hiding in my cave. So I have a book coming out in August with a new publisher called McMillan Press. I'm really pleased. There's a little bit of an irony, and it runs in parallel with what we're doing, that it's a new press that's been set up. It's curious that some presses have sprung up during lockdown and others have shut down, closed down. So McMillan Press is based in the Pennines, run by Colin Bancroft, who I believe is putting out 10 pamphlets, slim volumes, whatever you call them, depends on how many pages, I suppose, what the pagination is. This year, the first one's coming out in April this month, yeah. And mine, which is called After the Riot, is coming out in August. So I'm really looking forward to that as well. And hopefully by August, we'll be able to stand up and read some of these poems to people.
In front of real life people again.
Yeah, and they can jeer you and throw things at you if they don't like them. I like that, you know, rather than, you know, libraries and people don't know what to do, you know, when you finish reading a poem, whether they can just nod their heads politely or look embarrassed. At least if they, you know, throw something at you, you know, you're getting...
Free tomatoes for all.
Yeah, at least if you're being heckled, you know that people are really engaging with it.
I don't know what the Zoom protocol is after you've read a poem either. You know, it's like, instead of having a room full of embarrassed people, you've just got a screen full of embarrassed people.
I think my favourite post poem Zoom reaction is like the muted clapping that you get from everyone, wherein you can observe that the sentiment of applause is there, but obviously if 30 people were to unmute themselves at once, it would be a god-awful mess, just for the sake of having an actual applause. Or the applause reaction, which I've noticed is a Zoom thing now, that you can put up a reaction that you're applauding in spirit.
There is one huge advantage of this. I mean, a friend of mine, Martin Malone, and is a fabulous poet himself, he said to me that the gift, the two things you need for a successful poetry reading, Neil, are booze and bog breaks. Now, you do Zoom readings and people can have as much booze and bog breaks as they like.
They can watch you on the bog, which is delightful.
Booze and bog breaks.
I really like watching the boxes to see if there's anybody drinking gin from the bottle and things like that. You know, it's you're supposed to be watching the poet in the middle of the screen, but you're much more interested in what's going on in all these, you know, different little boxes.
I
There's a
think
poem waiting to be written about that.
that there is, though, there will be like a series of comedic verse, and I'm sure series of very, very serious ones as well, wherein you spend an entire poetry reading trying to decipher the bookshelves in the background of the person who's not reading. I think that's something that people will probably swing back to when they feel a little bit more comfortable to kind of make light of the situation. Like, there's certainly a lot of comedy to be written about, because Zoom has just sort of, I mean, it has been a lifeline in terms of helping us interact, and like for stuff like this, for example, we simply wouldn't have been able to do this if it weren't for Zoom and for similar platforms, but it has very much forced an etiquette conversation about how you engage with people and how you conduct yourself properly through the medium of a video call. It's a very strange new dynamic that people have had to get to grips with over the last few months. So before we get into kind of like the politics of Zoom communication and how we do and don't conduct ourselves, something that I know that we talked about a little bit kind of before we came on air, as it were, was whether you felt comfortable sort of sharing some of your poetry, either stuff that you've got coming out or stuff that you are sort of like quietly nursing in the background. And given that we are sort of making the Sabotage platform sort of open-ended for anyone who needs or wants to promote their work, it would be wonderful to hear from all of you, any of you, if any of you felt comfortable sharing something. Neil, I know you've already mentioned that you've got a pamphlet coming out, and Hugh has got 28,000 poems that he can select from his lockdown writing.
At least, yeah.
So if there is anything that any of you would feel comfortable sharing, I'm not gonna start naming names or anything.
Well, here, look, I'm going to jump in because I just had a book out, which I forgot to mention, that came out just before Christmas, and it is. I'm just going to plug that. It just is so. I can actually say it's so lovely because my friend Helen did all these beautiful paintings that are also inside it, which has the bonus of then I can actually stand there without embarrassment and say, no, it's a beautiful book. Because it looks so lovely. So I have that new book out. It's called Silver Spoon, and it's from Salmon Poetry, or bookshops have it. And that's all I want to say. I don't know, I suppose I could read a poem from there.
Yeah.
I'll read the first one because Neil asked me to read it the other day, and I didn't get around to it, so I'll read this now. The first one is called, it's kind of it's in the voice of the island of Ireland, speaking to refugees or people basically coming to the island. Welcome. I open up my craggy arms, my cliffs, this shift of whirling gulls, stretch my beaches wide, reach out my hands made of coral, stone, and sand, scatter islands like roses or breadcrumbs to show you where to land. And when you're close enough, I'll lift up the rough cloth of my hedges, fields, and locks, wrap its patchwork cloak around you, gather the lush green folds and rolls of sequin blues to make an earth cocoon for you to grow in. Because when you're rested and ready to stir, it will be my pleasure to watch your wings unfurl in my cloud-thick hair, sprout your new roots, feet deep, into my lungs, and feed me your fresh air.
Actually, how we should do a muted applause.
Yeah.
That was so beautiful, Jessamine. Thank you. One of my oldest friends is from Ireland, so I feel like a strange nostalgia from hearing that. Thank you so much. That was really beautiful. For anyone who would like to buy Jessamine's book, I'm sure we can make a link available in the handy little YouTube description, which will be popped in when this video goes live. So yeah, thank you so much for going first and kind of volunteering as tribute. Neil, do you have anything that you feel comfortable sharing, either from like the upcoming book, or from an existing book, beautifully modelled?
I could read something from my forthcoming book, After the Riot, and this is a poem called Grosvenor Square, which some people might recall. Grosvenor Square used to be where the American embassy was in London before it was moved, and this is a poem which is a recollection of an incident that happened in 2002 in the build up to the Iraq War. There was this fella, a dad he was. Don't ask me why he was there, but not to protest against war, I'm guessing, unless a sleeping Ben in a pram was his covert weapon. Because just as the riot broke out and people were scattering, charging, surging, trampling everywhere, and smoke bombs thickened, flames were rising, and up on the wall of the US Embassy, 3 masked demonstrators were strutting, burning the stars and stripes to the roar and salutes of the crowd. And just as we could hear the first incoming clatter of whoos, he was right in front of me, lifting the pram. And me and 2 women, without any prompting, grabbed an end each and hoisted the win, still sleeping through the whole shebang, onto the pavement beside the side street. And then the dad was shouting, stranded. So we all lifted him. He was crowd surfed to the edge of the riot and smiling, laughing, thanking us as he was planted down with his child, then hurrying off from the scene. And that was the instant I hunched down low just in time to miss the shattering glass from the pub windows and the robocops as they zigzagged on the street and swiped through bodies and smoke. And it makes me wonder, these many years later, why it was so easy to lift a small child backwards in a pram through a riot when millions of us couldn't stop a war.
Very good indeed.
Brilliant, yeah.
Thank you so much, Neil. That was really powerful stuff. Thank you. And that's from your forthcoming chapbook or pamphlet or whatever, by any other name would spell as sweet.
After the Riot, it'll be out from 9 Pens Press in August.
Wonderful. Right, we will look for. Honestly, the best and worst thing about running Sabotage is that year on year I just find a reading list. I've been counting votes for the past 100 years, sort of for 4 or 5 days. And yesterday, when I was going through nominations for the best anthologies, I was thinking, oh god, I haven't heard of this one, and I haven't heard of this one, and this one sounds really wonderful. My PayPal account is like, Charlie, you need to calm down and have a word with yourself. Thank you very much for giving us that taster, Neil. Hugh, would you feel comfortable finishing off with Jessamine is so well prepared for this, all of these wonderful books to hand.
We should put her to the test and throw in a name she's not prepared for yet. See if she can
suddenly just produce a book out of nowhere.
Cemetery. Anyway. Yeah, I'll read this. The other 2 will be sick of hearing this. They have this poem the other day, but it blinks in with the Josie Neil thing we were talking about earlier on. And that is the handwritten letter that she sent me. I turned that into a poem, really, which is kind of like a found poem. A lot of it's what she said to me. There's a reason why People hate meeting poets, of course, in case they're turned into substandard verse. Anyway, this is called The Poet. When asked, the poet could not remember the names of her books. In fact, could not remember there were any books at all, but sat down and hand wrote from memory on tight foolscap 7 poems, including one several pages long. You see, she explained, you see, dear man, my memory is not so good. I have been called frail, but it's strange that when I recall those days in Muirkirk, which means the church on the moor, I see things quite clearly, and these poems which I am sending you are like that. Winter scenes and stirks and old heads and wee lasses. I wrote about them in the language of the people, and here they are now, always.
Lovely.
God, what a special poem. Thanks. Honestly, I feel like I need a little time out after this recording. There's been so much powerful stuff shared. Thank you so much, Hugh. You seem to be as talented as poets as you are at putting a press together, which it should be no surprise at all. But it's been so wonderful to hear from you. Thank you, Jessamine. I feel like I've got like a glamorous assistant in the corner of my Zoom screen. Right. All of the, I say this with a level of certainty that I perhaps can't guarantee, but things that have been read from kind of during this recording, we will make links available in the YouTube description, and if not in the YouTube description, it will no doubt be on the Sabotage social media somewhere, because we really, really want to plug these special projects kind of now more than ever. So thank you so much, the 3 of you, for giving up a chunk of your morning to come and have a chat with me and to come and read for our rapt audience at some point in the future, once our time travel has taken off. It's been a real joy, and I sincerely wish you all the best with your independent projects and your collective projects, and I have no doubt that our paths will cross again in some form or another soon. So thank you, Charley.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a million.